roll, if that's okay. This is one of the lyrics that I thought it was a bit of inspiration, and was the song playing as you were getting your seats. It's kind of an interesting idea that I think you two are playing with about this notion that America isn't a place, but an idea. And I thought a lot about that as Samantha had asked me to speak a little bit. So, good morning. My name is Broughton. I am not from around here, funny enough. And it's also my first time at CreativeMornings, by the way, so thank you for that. And quite honestly, I look forward to the next session where I'm more where you are, and probably a little less nerve-wracked. But this morning, I'm going to be talking a little bit about roots. And I'm not really going to talk about roots. Even after all these years in America, every now and then there are a word or two that I still receive in my British sensibility and get muddled as to what we're referring to. And obviously, you're not interested in how I got here. Little bit more, perhaps, figurative and metaphorical, I would think. Roots, I think that's probably a bit better. Perhaps roots inform our sense of place. Agnes Martin is an abstract expressionist, or was an abstract expressionist, one of my favorites. She was interviewed by a curator while she was still alive about the reason that she left New York when abstract expressionism was really in its heyday, sort of probably 60s, for a far-flung, very remote part of Texas. And she said something that was, I think, very powerful, which was, knowing where to be is far more important than knowing what to do. And I think also this idea of roots inspires our ability to uproot and begin again too, because of the strength of our roots. It's certainly been my experience that one has to embrace this notion and not fear it too much. A bit of natural fear, obviously, but how many of us have had this experience? Yeah. And we don't mean uproot at the expense of everything before, do we? Right? We don't mean uproot at the expense of history. It's because of it. And I think that there is a true sense of transition, journey, progress that is part of a state of being human. All right, so let's start with the nature analogy. It was given to me by the virtue of the idea of roots, so I'm sorry about that. But let's imagine an aspen grove. As we walk through this grove, let's sort of contemporize the idea that we're reading and hearing and watching and listening to a hill versus the ville, city versus county, St. Louis, America, Republican, Democrat, Europe, Brexit, the world. You could definitely perceive that our differences loom large. But is that really the case? There is a poet, philosopher guy called Mark Nepo. He argues that we're far more connected than we think. And he uses an aspen grove as an analogy. Aspen trees are lanky, and their bark stretches like ribbons to the sky. As we wander through the grove, says Nepo, we see individual, separate tall trees. But what we don't see, as we look at them, is what is below the ground. They are all connected, linked by the same extensive, interdependent root system. So while, yes, we are a diverse group of beautiful human beings, we are also connected to one another, unified by our place, our humanity, and, just guessing, by virtue of the fact that we're all here this morning, a collective desire to improve ourselves. Singular, yet connected, interdependent and dependent. That's all thanks to our roots. My roots, well, not really a story that's any more uncommon than all of yours. I grew up in a religious cult until I was age 10. Nothing weird about that. Looking back on it, it was an immensely courageous act by my parents to uproot us and start all over again on a very different path. The physical and emotional transition to start new roots was considerable, and it came with great sacrifice that was not evident going in. Friendships, in our case, had to end. Family never saw us again or spoke to us, and haven't to this day. Parents ultimately divorced under the pressure of the transition. Yet the rewards for the uprooting, I truly think, saved us. The uprooting literally became an opportunity of freedom. Friends formed again. Freedom from an oppressive worldview was suddenly attainable. Education and independence was able to be sought. This idea that we can transcend our parents' experience and then pass that desire onto our own kids. And then that idea of journey and uprooting continued into my adulthood. And I had originally planned to become an architect, and I had a place at university to read architecture. And I had really spent a lot of time thinking that professional services were where it's at, and this was kind of my gateway, if you like. But there was still significant kind of doubt troubling me personally, and I decided to lean into that and really embrace it. And ultimately uprooted again, and this time to study theology, because that's really obvious that you'd do next, right? And I think some of it was to do with intellectualizing my or our pursuit, that idea of wanting to understand and have sort of a sense of purpose, the human experience. My story, could my roots have a deeper meaning than just being about me? Theology really encouraged the questioning that one does, and it really kind of gave me a sense of a framework of how to think. And ultimately, the next logical step in a very illogical journey was to become a songwriter. So I began searching for my Tom York. Anybody found theirs? Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. I didn't either, hence I'm here for the record. And that's finally when I realized what roots mean for me in particular. And frankly, that very important partner, uprooting. What I began to discover was the driving force around this idea was the story of our lives, the very personal narrative that we all have, whether we knowingly realize we are telling one or not. And our stories interconnect as we interact with each other, right? Someone once said that after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are all we need. Strip away all the hype, the necessities notwithstanding, what's left? Stuff and stories. And I think we can all relate that stories hold our attention longer. They are much more relatable. They're much more for the commonwealth. At this point, I began to sort of focus a bit more internally and really try to identify with something that was a bit more purposeful now, that was sort of an inspiration to me. And that enabled me to grow in different directions, if you like. And it brought me to the US, another uprooting, in fact. What was then a very big life decision that came with, relative physical and emotional sacrifice again. But the rewards have been truly extraordinary. Definitely could not have conjured them up in my mind pre the risk or the leap, if you like. Our story, as it pertains to the notion of roots, turns out to be pretty fundamental, at least in my experience. At this point, I became intrigued by how brands are perceived, how other people's stories are heard. Never boring. They can be told in boring ways. But when you really listen, they're always amazing. Friends, mentors, they became nourishment as opposed to just arbitrary. And the idea of place took on a really deep meaning. And the last point here is probably where I'll lean in a bit more, because it's probably the thing that's more relevant to all of us together, the St. Louis narrative.
St. Louis is the home of makers, builders, creators, thinkers, and doers. We've always been this way, and today, our tenacious spirit of doing is creating a renaissance from the ground up, one creator at a time. You see, this is a place that loves to say yes, one that shows up for our neighbors, for our teams, for each other. We are generations old and generations young. We're the home of global leaders and local gems. We're looking in the mirror and seeing what needs to be done. Committed to building a region that doesn't stop moving forward. By bringing people, businesses, and institutions together in bold ways with a determined spirit of optimism to create a region that's more open to all. We're making a place where you can start something, where you get the support to stand out, where you can stay, put down roots, and make St. Louis yours. Nowhere does the spirit of being STL made shine brighter than in the stories of the people who live here, because the people here make St. Louis, but something about St. Louis makes our people too. That's STL made. See our stories at thestl.com.
It started as an initiative to kind of encourage economic development. And we found from listening to some of the folks that had initially asked us to kind of get involved in this, that there were both business, civic, and other organizations that were struggling with how to tell the St. Louis story. And that often when they were telling it, it would either conflict or it wouldn't grab emotionally the attention of the people that were needing to hear it. So we began talking to people and collecting stories. In fact, we talked to a whole lot of people, both inside St. Louis and outside. And the goal really was to capture the story of today's St. Louis and begin to inspire this notion of a movement. What we found was very real and tangible grassroots renaissance happening here, bubbling up from the ground up. Creators, thinkers, doers, makers throughout St. Louis, all of you in this room here, we are a part of STL Made, and it is a movement that is driving our region forward. However, we know that it takes more than just some great words, some marketing, perhaps certainly money. It needs something more in order to kind of catch light, if you like. It takes tangible proof. It takes a story to create a movement.
One year ago, we made a bold announcement.
We are so excited to be here today to officially announce this group's mission to bring a Major League Soccer club to the fabulous city of St. Louis.
It is with great honor to announce that St. Louis will be the 28th team in Major League Soccer. Congratulations.
We got in the game. Now comes the next step as we begin building a world-class club. And that begins with building a world-class home. This is our new destination. A vision for 31 acres of downtown development, team headquarters, with training fields and gathering spaces for our local businesses and our community to share on game day and every day.
We want to create an urban hub that brings people together 365 days a year.
Something bigger than just a stadium. It's about re-energizing downtown West. The ownership group is committed to developing an entire district.
We want to turn downtown West into another great destination.
With a commitment to be an exceptional club and neighbor, our MLS team stadium will not only be a home for soccer, but serve as a place to bring people together, hosting games, community events, and concerts. A vibrant downtown anchor that will be open to the community year-round. Because our district will be a destination for all to enjoy. For the region, for the city, for the fans. Our home field advantage begins with our home. MLS STL 2022.
So MLS serves as that proof point, right? It's something that begins to symbolize this turn of civic sentiment that we're looking for, that the movement's all about. Think about it. The Blues wins the Stanley Cup. St. Louis lands an MLS team, and with it, a commitment to build a 35-acre development district in the heart of downtown West. That's kind of the story behind MLS for the Loot. From the beginning, this initiative was about more than the sport, more than soccer. It was inspired by a desire to contribute to the story of our city and serve as a proof point of why our city's narrative is rooted in the notion that our region is anchored by our city. Celebrating the city as a sporting, business, and living destination, and that it's far more key to our renaissance than treating it like a millstone that only serves to magnify irrelevance. We aren't looking to sell something. We're looking to tell something. A story of our strong roots and a willingness to uproot the status quo and make us all stronger. Once upon a time, our downtown was purposefully designed to not be a communal place to gather and live. And today we are still trying, in some ways, to recover from that. Gathering places, open spaces, local businesses, and residential hubs. That is what we're trying to do and create and inspire with this. The sum of our parts really must ladder to a greater whole, interconnected by an idea that aligns all of our future. And that's kind of where I start recruiting you guys, quite honestly. Flag bearers, advocates, disciples of the St. Louis story. Because unless we proliferate this movement throughout our community, proving that our intent to drive St. Louis forward, the noise of the shit falling apart will always be louder than that which is coming together. So unless we proliferate the movement throughout our community, proving our intent to drive St. Louis forward, the noise of the shit falling apart will always be louder than that which is coming together. Equally, one of these exciting things coming together is MLS for the Lou. It's not just another sports team for old white guys, I promise. It's truly an idea and a symbol about our future. Please join STL Made. Please join MLS for the Lou. Please lead them. In conclusion, back to our nature analogy and the aspen grove. Yes, on the surface, we do seem and sound different. And of course, each of us are individuals, human beings, being unique. But underneath, we share the same root system. And I believe how we understand ourselves and our story is how we contribute to the work of the whole. Thank you.